Hey there. Ever feel like the world of startups is speaking a different language?
Haha. Yeah, I can feel that way sometimes.
Well, we're about to decode a big one. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
Oh, a classic.
This book's been a go-to since it came out back in 2011, and for good reason. We're not just summarizing it, though.
Right.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a handle on how to actually use these principles in your own work.
Whether you're launching a company
A project.
or even just trying to, break a bad habit.
It's fascinating how this book resonates even if you don't see yourself as the startup type.
Yeah, definitely. Rise argues that these principles apply to, well, anyone creating something new amidst uncertainty.
And let's face it, who isn't dealing with uncertainty these days?
True. He actually defines a startup as any group of people tackling something new without all the answers.
Okay, so it could be
It could be a team in a huge company.
a nonprofit.
Even just you and a side hustle.
So it's less about beanbag chairs and ping pong tables and more about a mindset, right?
Absolutely. Ree's big idea is validated learning. It's not just about brainstorming. It's about, actually testing your ideas in the real world.
To see what sticks.
Exactly.
Which is a huge departure from how a lot of businesses traditionally operate.
For sure. Think about all those business plans filled with projections. They're often just shots in the dark.
And then reality hits.
Oof, yeah.
And Rees actually saw this firsthand with his own company, IMVU.
Oh, right.
They were totally convinced that people wanted avatar-based instant messaging.
Interesting. Like a fun add-on to...
AOL Instant Messenger.
Yeah, or Yahoo Messenger, right. Those
Yeah.
were huge at the time.
They were massive.
So it seemed logical building on existing platforms.
Right, made sense on paper.
But they made a classic mistake.
Which was?
They didn't test their assumption. They just went full steam ahead, building this complex add-on.
And when they finally launched,
And crickets.
crickets.
Oh, that's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the value in validated learning.
Right.
So did they just throw in the towel at that point?
Not quite. This is where Rees' experience really illustrates the power of a pivot.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They took a really hard look at how customers were using the product, or in this case, if anyway, and realized their initial assumption was flawed.
What? People didn't want an add-on?
They didn't. They wanted a separate avatar-based platform to connect with new people.
Ah, okay, so they completely shifted gears.
They pivoted. And it's a perfect example of how challenging your assumptions, even when it means, abandoning a cherished idea,
Right.
can actually lead to success. Another great example is Intuit, the company behind TurboTax.
Intuit. Wow, okay. What did they do?
They adopted lean startup principles across the entire company.
Wow.
No small feat for a company of that size.
No kidding. How do you even begin to shift from releasing, one product a year
Right.
to, as Rees puts it, building an innovation factory?
They started measuring success by the revenue generated by offerings that didn't exist the year before. It's a simple but profound shift in thinking.
It's like they flipped the script.
Completely.
Instead of being bogged down in, endless development cycles, they're constantly experimenting, testing, and iterating on new ideas.
It's amazing. They even created what they call innovation sandboxes.
Innovation sandboxes.
Have you heard of this?
I like the sound of that already. What are those?
It's basically about giving teams a space to experiment without, putting the entire company at risk.
Okay.
So they can kind of play around with new ideas, hence the sandbox.
So it's like a safety net for experimentation, but within a larger company.
Exactly.
Okay.
It allows them to apply these lean startup principles even within a massive established organization.
That actually reminds me of the Kodak Gallery story in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Not your typical scrappy startup, but a great example nonetheless.
Kodak,
As in the film company.
the one and only. They have this online photo service, Kodak Gallery.
And they wanted to add this feature for creating collaborative event albums. Sounds like a good idea, right?
In theory, yeah. But did they jump right into building it out?
They resisted the urge.
Oh, good.
They actually created a very, very basic prototype, almost embarrassingly simple. But here's the key. They actually showed it to customers. And good thing they did, because they quickly realized people were struggling to even create the albums in the first place.
So the idea itself wasn't viable.
Not necessarily. Maybe the design was confusing, maybe the instructions weren't clear, who knows. The important thing is they got this feedback early on. before,
Wasting time.
wasting time and resources on a feature that wasn't working as intended.
That's the beauty of the MVP, the minimum viable product, right?
Yeah.
Just getting something out there quickly, even if it's not perfect,
Yeah.
just so you can start gathering that validated learning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Ries offers several examples of this in the book, like Dropbox. They were developing this file syncing service.
Right.
Pretty novel concept at the time.
It's one of those things that's hard to kind of wrap your head around until you've experienced it, right? Like
Yeah.
before file syncing was commonplace, I imagine it must have been a tough sell.
Totally. So instead of trying to explain it, they did something brilliant.
Yeah.
They created a simple video just showing the product in action.
Oh, smart.
And it went viral.
Of course, it's a classic example of like a low-fidelity MVP, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't the actual software,
Right.
but it communicated the value and got people excited.
It's like a movie trailer for your product.
Yeah.
And it allowed them to test their core assumption
Yeah.
that people actually wanted this without, building the whole system first.
Right.
So the MVP doesn't have to be fancy.
Nope.
Just effective.
Just effect, exactly. And it can be even simpler than a video.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ries talks about this company, Food on the Table, that was developing this pretty complex meal planning service
Okay.
tailored to your dietary needs and your local grocery store sales.
That does sound kind of complex.
It was. But they didn't start by trying to build that whole system.
Right.
They started with a very basic MVP, a concierge service.
The concierge service for meal planning. How did that work?
Essentially, they did everything manually at first. They would speak directly to customers
Okay.
to understand their needs and preferences, check out local grocery deals, and then create personalized meal plans and shopping lists.
So like having a personal chef.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And this high-touch approach allowed them to gather really valuable insights into what customers actually wanted and what it would take to actually build a successful product.
And I'm guessing it was a little more cost-effective than trying to develop some complex software platform right out of the gate.
Much more. The concierge MVP let them validate their assumptions and refine the product before investing heavily in development.
This is all making a lot of sense, but let's be real. Not every experiment is going to be a home run, right? So what happens when things don't go as planned?
Right. That's where the really tough decisions come in. Knowing when to pivot or persevere.
Oh, I bet those are some tough calls.
They can be. The lean startup method provides a framework, a data-driven way to navigate those decisions.
Okay, I like that.
Ries tells this very compelling story about a company called Vodison. They were building a platform to connect voters and increase political engagement.
Noble goal, but as we're learning, passion alone doesn't guarantee a successful business.
Exactly, and Vodison is a prime example of how, even with the best of intentions, you have to be brutally honest with yourself about what's working and what's not.
Right.
They went through multiple pivots, 4 in total, constantly iterating and testing their assumptions.
And each pivot was backed by data,
Oh, absolutely.
not just a gut feeling.
They were brutally honest with themselves about the product.
Wow.
Their initial MVP, a traditional social networking platform, wasn't getting the traction they had hoped for.
So they scrapped it completely.
Not entirely. They had this feature for verifying voter registration status, and people loved it.
Okay.
So they honed in on that aspect, pivoting to a platform focused solely on making it easier for people to contact their elected officials.
Smart.
It was. But even then, they weren't seeing the revenue needed to create a sustainable business.
Right.
So they pivoted again, this time to a platform where organizations could pay to send messages to targeted voters.
Wow, so their journey took a few unexpected turns.
It did. But the key is that each pivot brought them closer to a viable business model. And through it all, they stayed true to the core principles of the lean startup method, which is build, measure, learn.
Build, measure, learn. I love it. This is all starting to click. But there's one thing I'm still a little unclear on. How do you actually measure progress with this method? Like, traditional business metrics don't really seem to apply in the same way.
You're right. Metrics like profit and market share don't tell the whole story for startups.
Right.
Ries highlights the need for what he calls innovation accounting.
Innovation accounting. That sounds kind of intimidating.
It's not as complex as it sounds. It's about focusing on the metrics that matter most when you're validating assumptions and trying to find a sustainable model.
Okay, so what kind of metrics are we talking about here?
Well, it depends on your business and its engine of growth.
Okay.
Like if you're building a product that's relying on virality, think Facebook or Instagram, you'd focus on what's called the viral coefficient.
The viral coefficient. Can you remind me what that is again?
Sure. It measures how many new customers each existing customer brings in. So if your viral coefficient is greater than 1,
Okay.
each customer brings in more than one new customer, and it creates this beautiful self-sustaining growth loop.
Got it. So for those businesses that are relying on going viral, that's the key metric. What about other types of businesses?
If you're relying on, say, paid advertising, what Ries calls the paid engine of growth, you'd focus on something called customer acquisition cost, or CAC.
Which is basically how much you spend to acquire each new customer.
Precisely. And you'd also look at customer lifetime value, or LTV.
Which is how much revenue you expect to make from that customer over, their entire relationship with your business.
Right. And the goal is for your LTV to be significantly higher than your CAC.
Makes sense. You want to make sure you're earning more from those customers than you spend to get them in the door.
Exactly. And that's just one example. Ries goes into a lot of detail about different, growth engines and the most relevant metrics for each.
Okay, so we've got our MVP. We're using innovation accounting to measure progress. What else is essential for, really finding success with the lean startup method?
We also need to think about, building an organization that can handle this rapid pace of change this method really demands. Ries calls this building an adaptive organization.
Adaptive, so like a chameleon blending in with its surroundings.
In a way, yeah. It's about being able to respond really quickly to new information, change course when you need to, and, just constantly learn and improve.
That sounds great in theory, but how do you actually create that kind of culture?
Yeah.
Especially in companies that, let's face it, are kind of structured to, resist change.
It's a challenge for sure. Ries offers some really practical advice, though. He talks about the importance of working in small batches.
Small batches. Okay, walk me through that.
So it's actually a concept borrowed from lean manufacturing,
Okay.
where the goal is to produce things in small quantities so you can spot and address any issues really early on.
So instead of baking, 100 cookies and then realizing they're all burnt,
Exactly.
you bake a dozen, see how they turn out, and then
Yes.
adjust.
Exactly. And this principle applies to product development, too.
Okay.
So instead of building this massive complex feature,
Right.
you build a smaller version, test it, gather feedback, and iterate.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be faster to just build the entire thing at once?
It might seem that way, but think about it. What if you spend months building something your customers don't actually want?
Ouch. Talk about a waste of time and resources.
Right. So working in small batches, it lets you get that feedback early on and often,
Right.
which helps you avoid those costly mistakes.
Okay, I'm seeing the wisdom in that, but I imagine it takes a real shift in mindset for a lot of companies.
It does. Ries talks about creating a culture of continuous improvement,
Okay.
where everyone on the team is empowered to, identify and solve problems. He highlights this really simple but powerful tool called the 5 whys.
The 5 whys.
Yeah.
That sounds almost deceptively simple.
It might sound simple, but it's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
Essentially, anytime you encounter a problem, you just ask why 5 times in a row.
Okay.
And by drilling down like this, you can uncover that root cause of the issue.
Like a detective game for problem solving.
Exactly.
Right.
And once you've identified that root cause,
Yeah.
you can come up with a solution that actually addresses the actual problem, not just the symptoms.
I love that. Okay, so we're working in small batches. We're using the 5 whys to solve problems. What else do we need to build this adaptive organization?
It's also essential to create a culture of trust and transparency,
Okay.
where people feel comfortable, admitting mistakes and sharing information openly.
That's often easier said than done.
Yeah.
Especially in environments where, failure is kind of viewed negatively.
It's true. But Ries argues that in a lean startup, failure isn't really the opposite of success. Okay.
It's actually part of the process. It's about learning from those mistakes and then using those lessons to improve.
So kind of adopting that fail fast, fail often mentality.
Yes. But with a crucial caveat, it's about failing smart.
Ah, okay.
It's about designing experiments, collecting data, and then actually using that data to make more informed decisions.
I think this is all finally starting to come together for me. It's not just about building products, it's about building a better way of working.
Yeah.
A way that's like adaptable and data-driven and focused on that continuous learning.
Exactly.
And the beauty of it is this lean startup method, it can be applied in any type of organization.
Right.
From a tiny little startup to a massive Fortune 500 company.
So whether you're, developing a revolutionary new product or simply just trying to improve a process within your team,
Right.
these principles can really help you get there.
Faster and with less waste.
Exactly. And that's really the power of the lean startup approach. Making smarter decisions, taking calculated risks,
Yes.
and ultimately building something truly valuable.
I love it.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I'm already thinking about all the ways I can apply these principles in my own work.
Me too.
So, if you had to pick one leap of faith assumption that you're currently operating under,
Okay.
maybe in your work or a personal project, or even just like a habit that you're trying to change, what comes to mind?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And how could you test that assumption this week
Yes.
with a minimum viable product?
Love it.
Like, what's the smallest, simplest experiment that you could run to get some real-world feedback?
That's the key. Don't get stuck overthinking it. Just get out there and experiment.
Words to live by.
Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive. I've learned a ton.
This was fun.
And to everyone listening, best of luck with your own experiments.